a wedge of cheese, and a scent that led to death. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. Your comments bring this community to life. I always love reading everyone. Let's begin. At 10:58 that morning, the doorbell did two things I don't like. First, it rang during Wolfe's beer, his second glass, which is the portion he defends with the kind of zeal that built empires and wrecked them. Second, it kept ringing. Whoever was on the stoop had a pulse and a finger with stamina. I went to the front door because that's what I do, and because Fritz had just come upstairs to announce that if a certain aroma was going to continue haunting the kitchen, he would sooner serve our lunch on the curb. You don't ignore Fritz when he starts using the word haunting. It's bad for the digestion. On the stoop sat a crate roughly the size of a small cannonball, with slats wide enough to let out the smell and none of the charm. It wore a red stencil. Delicate. The copywriter had a sense of humor. There was also a wax-sealed envelope tied to the top with twine. No delivery man, no signature, just the crate and a confidence that we would adopt it. I've handled ticking packages before, metaphorically and otherwise. This one wasn't ticking, it was breathing. I hauled it in because Nero Wolfe prefers not to greet the world at his threshold, and got it to the office table. Wolfe, in his chair behind the desk, gave it the glance he reserves for moths, taxes, and novelists who write about orchids. "Archie," he said, "very smooth. If that is a biological experiment, it may convalesce on the sidewalk." "It's cheese," I told him. "Possibly two kinds, the second kind being a crime." He shut his eyes halfway, which is a lot of expression for Wolfe. "Remove the lid, carefully." I pried up the slats with my pocket knife and introduced the brownstone to a wheel of cheese the color of old varnish and the consistency of a grudge. The rind was moist, the room was not. Fritz, stationed in the doorway with a dish towel like a priest with a stole, took one sniff and went pale in a way that didn't match his Austrian upbringing. "Pfui," Wolfe murmured, and yes, he stole the word from himself. "Wash your hands afterward, Archie." "I haven't touched the soul of it yet." I lifted the envelope instead. The wax was impressed with a neat little emblem, a wheel flanked by laurel leaves, the kind of thing a club would design when it has more dues than cents. I broke the seal and read, "For Mr. Wolfe. You will understand the message before supper." A friend on the back in smaller script. "Do not taste it." "Won't and wasn't going to," I said. I passed the note to Wolfe, who pinched it like it might leak. He read it twice, set it down, and didn't look at the cheese. That's the thing about Wolfe. When he refuses to feed a subject his eyes, you know the subject is about to lose. Anyway. "Fritz," he said, "open the windows. Not all, lest the plant rooms suffer. Some. To me, describe. Round 6 pounds, maybe 7. Rind washed, sticky. Smells like a cellar that insulted a cat. There's a cut in the rind, small, neat. No label, no maker's mark, just that note." I bent close, but not reckless. There's a line where the rind changes. 2 tones, burnished amber on the outside, paler beneath. Someone massaged this one like a violin lesson and then forgot the song. "You're not entirely witless," Wolfe said, which passes for a hug in our outfit. "Observe the seepage along the cut." I did. A gleam. Not the golden ooze of a cheese coming into its prime, but a clear, thin moisture, like sweat that didn't belong. I told him so. He pressed a button for the house phone. "Orchids are safe. This is not a day for their fragility." He released the button. "Place it on the far end of the table, no contact with the wood." I fetched 2 thick placemats from the dining room. Fritz loaned them with the resigned air of a man carrying blankets to a plague tent, and set the wheel on them. The brownstone bore it like a patient with a fever. "You can say you're not interested," I told Wolfe. "It would be the conventional move." "I'm not interested." He took the envelope again and sniffed the paper, not the cheese. Nevertheless, it is in my house. That line has closed more cases than some police careers. When something crosses our threshold uninvited, it becomes a violation. Wolfe treats violations the way Jupiter treats meteors. The doorbell found its muse again. I went to relieve it. This time, someone had the courtesy to attach a human being, a woman in a grey suit built to travel, brown hair pinned with a practical clip, face washed with the kind of fatigue you can't buy at a cosmetics counter. She held a leather portfolio and the posture of someone who has rehearsed not pleading. "Mr. Goodwin," she asked, recognizing me from the general notoriety of my sins. "I'm Serena Vale. Is Mr. Wolfe at home?" "He is, and so is a cheese with opinions. Come in and don't say I didn't warn you." She stepped into the office and lasted 3 seconds before she registered the wheel, the windows, and Fritz, who was breathing through his mouth politely. She flinched. You can't fake that kind of reaction. It comes from childhood or higher learning. She had the higher learning. "That," she said, "should not smell like that." "It's not alone," I told her, "but let's give it center stage. Mr. Wolfe, Serena Vale." She inclined her head to Wolfe. He didn't stand. That would have caused riots. He gestured to the red leather chair, and she took it like a veteran. "State it," he said. "I work for a consortium," she began, laying the portfolio on her knees. "The Confraternity of the Wheel. We represent small affineurs and cheesemakers in the Northeast who ship to restaurants and private collectors. 3 weeks ago, at a private tasting, a wheel from one of our members, Maison Merode, was served and sent 3 people home with violent illness. Not fatal, thank God, but public enough to spark rumors. 2 days later, another wheel from a different member arrived at a magazine for review. The editor called me to say it was obviously tampered with and refused to print, but the gossip got out. This," she nodded at our house guest, "was delivered to me last night with the same seal, you see. The note inside said only, 'Take this to Nero Wolfe. He'll smell the crime.'" Wolfe made a mild noise, the same pitch he uses for a Riesling that doesn't insult its vineyard. "And why, Miss Vale, would I undertake to nose about your dairy intrigues?" "Because," she said, clasping her hands, "someone is sabotaging our members' wheels in a way that is both deliberate and expert. They know how to mimic a wash. They know how to introduce rot without obvious puncture. And they know where the wheels are going. Whoever it is wants to ruin reputations before the winter contracts are signed. By spring, half our members will be begging distributors for crumbs. We've gone to the police. They were polite and dumbfounded. They will not set up a task force for a cheese." "Nor should they," Wolfe said, heavy as a door, "and yet you appeal to me. You have a reputation for defending the sanctity of environments," she said, glancing at the wheel, "for understanding that violation can begin small and end very large. You won't like that someone used your address as a theatre. Points to Miss Vale for doing her homework." Wolfe's mouth sharpened. "The saboteur sent this wheel to you to send to me, and then, impatient, he or she sent another to my door. An escalation." "Why?" "Because you might refuse me," she said. "Or because they needed you to see their work before supper." "That line was in the note," I told her. "We have the stationery to prove it." "Good," she said. "Then I'm not mad." "You could still be," I offered. "We collect the type." Wolfe tilted his head a fraction toward the wheel, the way a judge acknowledges an exhibit without stooping to examine it. "Miss Vale, what you have told me is enough to state a premise. The rind was altered after maturation. The cut is tidy. Someone with a wire, not a knife. The aroma is not merely strong, it is misdirected, masking odors, possibly ammoniated wash or an introduced smear. That would be work done by someone with access and motive." "Access we can list," she said. "Motive we can guess. Our members compete for the same buyers. We have a corporate suitor we turned down last year, and a food critic who thinks we're snobs with barns." "Names later," Wolfe said. "Fees now." That made her swallow. She quoted a figure that would keep trout on our table, but wouldn't buy Wolfe a new suit. He grunted, which in his language means promising, but leave room for dessert. "Mr. Wolfe," I put in, "before we adopt Miss Vale and her wheel, there's the small matter of dying. If these wheels are making people sick—" "They will not if we do not put them in our mouths," he snapped. "Miss Vale, you have not tasted this?" "I'm not that brave," she said. "I was told not to. I obeyed." "Wise." He closed his eyes, opened them, and gave her his verdict. "I take the case." She exhaled enough to move curtains. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You will earn it. You will bring me a list of all persons who touched distribution in the last 6 weeks. Warehouses, drivers, affineurs, brokers, assistants, interns, janitors, photographers, and editors who received samples. You will bring me the full membership roster of your confraternity and a copy of your charter, bylaws, and last year's minutes. You will bring me 3 uncontaminated wheels from 3 different members, each sealed at source and accompanied by affidavits. And you will not speak to the press. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you to your office to secure the documents and interview your staff. You will pay a retainer now." She nodded like a soldier on parade and reached for her checkbook. Fritz, having decided the world would not end before lunch, took the check and left us to our destinies. "Archie," Wolfe said, "photograph that wheel in situ, including the cut, and then sequester it in the front room with the windows open. I will not have my office serving as a hothouse for villainy. Also, telephone Dr. Vollmer and ask whether he can, at his convenience, receive a sample for analysis, sealed, untouched, with a custody record. We will not rely on gustatory assessment." "You're not even tempted?" I asked him. "My temptations wear better perfume," he said. Miss Vale rose. "There's one more thing." She lifted the portfolio and slid out a small, glossy photograph. A round wooden stamp, laurel leaves, a wheel, the same emblem from our note, pressed into a pale rind. "We found this mark burned onto a board in a storage room at one of our members' caves. It isn't ours. It showed up after a break-in last week. We thought it was kids. Now I'm not sure." Wolfe leaned forward 1 inch, which is his version of a leap. "Leave it," he said. "Mr. Goodwin, hat." I fetched my hat. When Wolfe moves me before noon, he's either cross or curious. His tone said curious. The brownstone had been disturbed. That was the case. The cheese was only the messenger. On our way out, I looked back at the wheel on its placemats. It sat there, smug and sweating like it knew we'd just let it rent a room in our day. I've seen homicides with less presence. Before supper, I said to it and to myself, "We'll see." Serena Vale's office sat on the 12th floor of a building that had been clean once, maybe when Calvin Coolidge was president. The elevator rattled like it was trying to remember its purpose, and the hallway smelled faintly of pasteurized ambition. She unlocked her office door, and I followed her in. Inside, the place had the look of a small enterprise trying hard to look important. Neat furniture, framed certificates, a coffee maker that had seen things, and a wall map with colored pins marking cheese producers, like tiny wounds across New England. I set my hat down and started a mental photo album. 5 desks, 3 occupied, 1 secretary, 2 analysts, 1 nervous intern pretending to read a spreadsheet. Each of them had the polite alertness of people who know trouble has walked in wearing a fedora. Miss Vale wasted no time. "Mr. Goodwin will be asking you questions," she told them, "and you'll answer completely. We're employing Nero Wolfe. That should be sufficient explanation." It was. They all straightened like school kids at the word employing. A few even looked relieved. Apparently, Wolfe's reputation in the food world was that of a man who ate well and solved better. I started with the secretary, a brisk woman named Nora who typed like she was charging for every key. "Who handles the shipments?" I asked. "Usually Miss Vale or me," she said. "The deliveries go from the producers to our warehouse in Yonkers. We catalog, store, and forward to clients or reviewers. We use a single bonded courier, New City Transport." "Who has keys to the warehouse?" "Miss Vale, myself, and Mr. March." "Who's Mr. March?" A tall man with tired eyes looked up from a ledger near the window. "That would be me," he said. "Operations manager. I sign for every shipment that comes or goes." I took a slow stroll toward him. "And the wheels that went bad. Who signed for those?" "I did," he said flatly. "They came through clean. No leaks, no strange odor, nothing. The tampering must have happened after they left." "That's a confident statement. You check them personally?" "I always do." "Anyone else see you check them?" "Sometimes Nora." He glanced toward her, but she was watching her keyboard like it might turn into a witness. Serena stepped in. "I trust Mr. March completely." "That's sweet," I said, "but trust doesn't make lab reports. Wolfe will need the paperwork, shipping logs, temperature records, inventory sheets for the last month." March opened a drawer and produced a folder so thick it could have been a novella. I took it and flipped through. Neat handwriting, regular timestamps. Maybe too neat. While I was checking the files, the intern piped up. "There was a photographer," he said hesitantly. "For that tasting event, he handled some of the wheels. Mr. Danner, he said he was working for Gastronome Weekly." Vale turned sharply. "I didn't hire any photographer." "He showed credentials," the intern said. "Badge, camera, everything. He took photos of the spread, the logo, the guests. We thought you approved it." I looked at Serena. "Did this Danner leave a card?" "No," she said, tight-lipped. "But if he's from Gastronome Weekly, I can find him." "Do that. Meanwhile, I'll check the warehouse." We left the office and drove to Yonkers, her coupe humming like a cautious confession. She drove well for someone who claimed to manage cheese and not nerves. The warehouse was a concrete bunker of climate control and dusted tiles, cool enough to make my teeth gossip. A single worker was labeling boxes in the back, a round fellow named Lundy with a hairnet and a suspicion problem. "I've been here every shift," he said. "If somebody tampered with our product, they had to be Houdini with a health permit." "Humor me," I said. "Show me where these famous wheels rested their heads." He led us to a row of oak shelves. Every space was labeled with chalk on slate: Merode 45, Francorn 22, Della Brie 7. The bad batch, according to Vale, came from the Merode section. I crouched, eye level with the shelves, and found faint smears on the wood where one wheel had been. Something translucent, sticky, and recent. I touched it with the corner of a paper scrap. "You clean these shelves daily?" "Every Thursday," he said. "Today's Tuesday." So this stain didn't come from last Thursday. I sealed the scrap in my notepad envelope. Wolfe would want it for analysis, and I wanted him to have it before supper, just like the note promised. As we were heading out, a thin man in an overcoat appeared at the door, pretending to study the street sign. His face was new to me, but his timing wasn't. I stepped toward him. "Looking for the Dairy Museum?" I asked. He blinked. "No, just waiting for a cab." I looked past him. No cab in sight. "You're early. The next one's due in about an hour." He smiled, shrugged, and walked off. I watched his shoes. Good leather, city polish, not warehouse standard issue. Back in the car, Serena said, "Do you think he followed us?" "I think he followed the smell," I said. "But it's not the cheese he's after. It's whoever's paying for this sabotage." When I got back to the brownstone, Fritz had exiled the offending wheel to the front room and barricaded the door with a towel under the crack. Wolfe sat with his lips pursed, reading the morning paper as if civilization depended on his posture. I gave him my report, handed over the scrap sample, and mentioned our friend Danner with the camera. He nodded once. Pooh, a saboteur who announces himself through art. It will end badly for him. Then his eyes flicked to the clock. Archie, dinner will not wait. But before you dine, you will telephone Saul Panzer. Tell him to locate this Mr. Danner and learn to which publication he pretends allegiance. You will also have him watch Miss Vale's office for our man. In the overcoat. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. The cheese, Archie, is no longer the question. The question is, who wanted it to arrive here? Someone has presumed to use my brownstone as bait. That tone meant one thing. The game had officially started, and for once it smelled worse than murder. When Saul Panzer answers your call, you can practically hear the precision through the wire. I gave him the basics. Fake photographer named Danner, a confraternity office worth watching, and a tail in an overcoat who thought shadows made him invisible. Saul grunted once, which in his language means he already had a plan and probably the guy's shoe size. By the time I hung up, he was on his way to Yonkers, and I could have bet my next week's pay he'd make that overcoat sing. Inside the brownstone, the air was holding its breath. The wheel of doom was still exiled to the front room, wrapped in a towel like a contagious relative. Fritz had fumigated with something lemon-scented, which helped until you remembered what it was trying to fight. Wolfe, in his chair, had the look of a man entertaining a private hypothesis. He wasn't ready to invite to dinner. "Report," he said, as if I hadn't already given him one. "I have, twice. You want it in iambic pentameter?" "Concision, Archie." I gave him the short form. Warehouse clean but suspiciously clean. Stain collected. Courier list from Miss Vale's files coming by messenger, and one phantom photographer who might have handled the poisoned wheels under the cover of taking glossy shots for Gastronome Weekly. Wolfe listened with eyes closed, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest like a man counting silent beats of an orchestra, only he could hear. When I finished, he said, "The substance from the shelf? Delivered to Volmer an hour ago. He'll call when he's done trying to make sense of it." "Good. And the woman?" "Home for the night unless Saul's overcoat friend calls on her. I told her to keep her door bolted." His eyes opened. "Her distress is genuine. That will make her both useful and inconvenient." "That's the trouble with honest clients," I said. "They tell the truth even when it ruins your timetable." He almost smiled. "That's a victory, though it never counts on the scoreboard." The phone rang at 9:20. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow at me, meaning it was my department. It was Saul. "I found our shutterbug," he said. "Name's Clifford Danner. Used to be on assignment with Gastronome Weekly until a year ago. Got fired for tampering with review samples. Added his own flair to make bad cheese look worse in photos. Then he freelanced for a PR firm called Brandforge. Guess who one of their clients was? Hit me. Millet Foods. They've been trying to buy out the confraternity for 2 years. The deal went cold last spring. That got my pulse going. So our man's back in business, poisoning the RTU market instead of photographing it? Could be. He's been renting a small studio in Midtown. I've got the address. I wrote it down, thanked him, and hung up. Wolfe's eyes were still half closed, but that didn't fool me. He was tracking every syllable. Millet Foods, he repeated. A leviathan pretending to admire plankton. They would sabotage artisanal competition with efficiency and impunity. Yet why risk my attention? Because your address was already in play, I said. The wheel came to us before we took the case. Somebody wanted you to notice. Maybe to keep the police out. Maybe to frame Miss Vale's crowd as amateurs. He nodded once. Not disagreement, but permission to think further. You will visit this Mr. Danner tomorrow. You will not identify yourself. You will pretend to be a potential client seeking promotional work. and you will observe what resides in his refrigerator. Suppose he offers me lunch. Decline. Politely. Fritz announced dinner, and that ended the business for the moment. Wolfe ate with his usual focus, like a scholar dissecting a philosophy instead of a steak, and didn't mention cheese once. I might have enjoyed the peace if my nose weren't haunted by the memory of that crate in the foyer. Later, around 11, the phone rang again. This time, it was Volmer. "I ran a quick analysis on your mystery smear," he said. "Not poison, not mold. A mild compound of ammonium salts mixed with a bacterial starter. Used in aging cheese, but not this kind. It's been adulterated with acetone." Meaning? Meaning someone washed the rind with a solvent. Enough to rot flavor, not enough to kill. They were destroying the product, not the consumer. I thanked him, hung up, and relayed the message to Wolfe, his lips compressed into a line that could have cut marble. Sabotage, then. Commercial, not homicidal. Yet the note, "You'll understand before supper," introduces performance. Our culprit craves recognition. That narrows it down to every crook in the creative industry, I said. Wolfe ignored me, which is his version of applause. Millet Foods has a publicity division. Several, I said. They buy goodwill the way we buy groceries. Weekly. Fine. Tomorrow, before you visit Mr. Danner, you will call their executive office and request an appointment under your own name, representing me. The pretext shall be inquiry into a potential acquisition. If they are innocent, they will be intrigued. If guilty, they will be frightened. Both outcomes serve. It was past midnight when I finally headed upstairs. The brownstone was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and, maybe, the evil memory of cheese fumes clinging to the drapes. I was almost asleep when the bell rang again. No delivery this time. Just a plain white envelope shoved through the door slot. I picked it up. Same handwriting as before. Same embossed wheel symbol. Inside was a single photo, the front of our brownstone taken that evening, lights burning in Wolfe's office window. On the back, in tiny, precise script, "Your supper was safe. For now." I took it upstairs and laid it on Wolfe's desk. He didn't look surprised, only thoughtful. "Archie," he said quietly, "we are being studied. By a guy who likes riddles. By a mind that mistakes malice for art," he corrected. "It is time we returned the compliment." And that was how I knew sleep was cancelled. The game had stopped smelling merely of cheese. It was starting to smell like danger. The next morning came with the kind of light that makes you wonder if the sun's having second thoughts. I was at my desk early, running through Saul's latest report, while Wolfe went through his breakfast ritual. Eggs softly scrambled, one slice of bacon, and the paper folded into surgical precision. Fritz brought in coffee strong enough to bribe a priest. We had the kind of silence that means the machinery in Wolfe's head was running, and I didn't plan to interrupt it unless something was on fire. The photo from the night before still sat on his desk, under a paperweight shaped like a chess knight. Wolfe had studied it longer than a man studies an opponent, until the meaning, whatever it was, had begun to interest him more than the threat itself. When he finally spoke, it was without looking up. Our correspondent demonstrates proximity and nerve. The photograph was taken from across 35th Street, likely with a telephoto lens. The message presumes surveillance. He wishes us to feel observed. We will oblige him by letting him see what we choose. That's cheerful, I said. What are we choosing? You, Archie, will proceed to your appointment with Mr. Danner. You will remain there long enough to be followed. You will then permit the tail to lose you near Madison Avenue and proceed to Miss Vale's office. Letting them think I'm meeting her again. Precisely. They must believe I advanced the investigation conventionally, not strategically. That's easy enough. Anything else you want me to stage? A car chase? He made the sound that passes for a chuckle. No melodrama, But you will be alert. Our saboteur, emboldened by his performance, may attempt another. I pocketed the photo, grabbed my hat, and headed for Dana's address. A third-floor studio on West 47th, wedged between a pawn shop and a piano tuner. The sign on the door read, Clifford Dana. Visual Communications, which is modern talk for taking pictures and lying about why. I knocked. The man who opened looked like he'd been ironed in a hurry. Sharp clothes, sleepy eyes, hair too careful to be careless. He sized me up, smiled like a salesman, and said, "You're the one who called about product shots?" "That's me," I said, stepping in. The place smelled of chemicals and ambition. 2 cameras sat on tripods. A half-empty bottle of bourbon kept them company. On one wall, dozens of prints, glossy spreads of wines, chocolates and cheeses, all looking more alive than they deserved. "Sit anywhere," he said. "You said you represent a brand." I said I was starting one. I wandered the room, letting my eyes slide over the clutter while I made small talk. "Something boutique, small producers. I want the photography to carry a story, something that smells honest." "That's rare in food," he said. His voice had that practiced smoothness that comes from selling one's conscience by the hour. "What kind of cheese?" "Let's say European inspiration, American nerve. The kind that could use a little publicity before a big tasting." He smiled thinly. "Ah, you're in the confraternity, aren't you? I heard about that mess." I let my eyebrows do a little dance. "What mess?" "Come on, mister, what did you say your name was?" "I didn't." He laughed softly. "Fair enough. But you didn't come here by accident. You people have been all over the food gossip column since those bad wheels showed up. They're saying sabotage, poison, competition warfare. It's exciting, really, for business." "Exciting's one word," I said. "You photograph any of those events?" "Not lately." He crossed to his desk, pretending to rearrange film canisters. "I used to, sure, but now I work for corporate clients. Big ones, less risk. Like Millet Foods?" He froze, just long enough for a man who knows timing. Then he smiled again, slower. "You've done your homework." "That's my business," I said. "Yours, apparently, too." He lit a cigarette with hands that didn't shake. "Millet hires me sometimes. They like control over presentation. Nothing unusual." "Unusual would be sending doctored samples to critics," I said, "or planting spoiled wheels in rival storage rooms." His eyes flickered once, then settled. "You're throwing around libel, friend. You sure you can afford that?" "Maybe not," I said, "but my employer can. Name's Nero Wolfe." That landed. He didn't flinch, but the air shifted like a chord struck off key. "Then this conversation is over," he said, voice steady. "I don't talk to detectives, especially ones who don't buy cheese." I left without argument. Outside, the morning crowd swallowed me. Half a block later, I caught a reflection in a window, a dark sedan parked too neat to be casual. I walked 3 more blocks, turned twice, ducked into a tobacconist's shop, and exited through the back alley. When I re-emerged near Madison, the sedan was gone. Either they'd lost me or wanted me to think so. By noon, I was in Serena Vale's office again. She looked better than yesterday. Less fear, more fight. "Any news?" she asked. "Plenty, but not the kind to print." I gave her the outline. Dana's ties to Millet, the photographic evidence, the probable motive. She listened with both hands folded tight, the kind of posture that holds a person together. "This could ruin us," she said. "If Millet's behind it, they'll deny everything. They have lawyers who live for that." "They also have pride," I said, "which Wolfe plans to use against them." Her phone rang. She hesitated, then answered, and froze. "Who is this?" she whispered. Her eyes met mine, wide. Then she hung up slowly. "What was that?" "A man's voice," she said, trembling slightly. He said, "You've let the detective in. You shouldn't have." Then the line went dead. I called the brownstone immediately. Fritz answered and passed me to Wolfe. I gave him the news. His tone didn't change an ounce. "Miss Vale is to return here with you at once. Bring her by cab. Make certain she is not followed. Our adversary has grown impatient, and impatience makes mistakes." He hung up before I could reply. Serena grabbed her coat, pale but determined. As we stepped into the hall, I caught a glimpse through the stairwell window, a man standing across the street, hat brim low, camera slung at his side. Dana, or someone who wanted me to think so. We hurried out the side exit, down to the street and into a cab. When I looked back, the man was still watching, his face half hidden, but smiling. That kind of smile doesn't promise an ending. It promises a next move. And for once, I didn't need Wolfe to tell me. The game had stopped being about cheese. It was now about power, and whoever was orchestrating it had just decided we were in the way. By the time the cab reached the brownstone, Miss Vale's color had returned from ghost white to a serviceable ivory. She clutched her portfolio as if it might serve as armor. Wolfe was waiting in his office, not standing, of course, but turned slightly in his chair, an event rare enough to earn its own calendar date. Fritz ushered us in and shut the door firmly, like sealing a vault. "Sit, Miss Vale," Wolfe said. "Archie, bolt the door." I did, because when Wolfe uses that tone, it's not advice. She sat. He studied her the way a botanist studies a specimen, carefully, without compassion, but not without respect. "You received a telephone call," he said. "Repeat the words precisely." She swallowed. The voice was male, deep, deliberate. He said, "You've let the detective in. You shouldn't have." Then he hung up. Wolfe nodded once. A statement of surveillance, intended to intimidate, not inform. The caller assumed you would report it here. "Then he wanted you to know," I said. "Of course," Wolfe murmured. "The note, the photograph, the call, they form a triad. Our adversary enjoys patterns. He also enjoys creeping me out," I added. "That is collateral." Wolfe turned to Serena. "Have you spoken of my involvement to anyone other than your staff?" "No, only to you, Mr. Goodwin, and Saul Panzer when he visited the office last night." "Panzer spoke to no one unnecessary," Wolfe said. "Therefore the leak originates elsewhere. The saboteur has access either to your telephone or to someone who reports to him." Her face tightened. "You think someone inside the confraternity—" "I think," Wolfe interrupted, "that espionage requires proximity. You will call your office and instruct Miss Nora to close operations for the day. Say the refrigeration system requires inspection. Then you will remain here until I determine otherwise." She hesitated. "But my staff is of less consequence than your safety," he said sharply. "Archie, the telephone." I handed it to her. She made the call with trembling fingers, delivering Wolfe's lie smoothly enough to win applause. When she hung up, Wolfe was already thinking 3 layers deeper. "Archie," he said, "you will retrieve Saul. I wish him here. Also, telephone Inspector Kramer and tell him I request a discreet laboratory consultation. He may send Sergeant Stebbins if he insists on the illusion of control. Inform him the matter concerns potential corporate sabotage and a public hazard. Kramer's going to love that. He will love less the alternative, public embarrassment." I called Saul first. He was 2 steps ahead, as usual. "Already saw your man in the overcoat," he said. Followed him to a coffee shop near Dana's studio. He met another man, mid-40s, expensive shoes, carrying a briefcase with a Millet Foods tag on the handle. They talked 20 minutes, then parted. Overcoat headed south, briefcase went east. "Get yourself here," I told him. "Wolfe wants you before lunch." Kramer was next. Predictably, he growled like a bear who'd discovered his cave was leased. I can't pull my men off a real case for cheese, Goodwin. Then call it industrial poisoning, I said. Wolfe's words, not mine. He says you'll want credit for handling it before the newspapers do. That did it. Kramer grumbled, promised to send Stebbins, and hung up hard enough to dent the receiver. Wolfe had listened through my end of the line naturally. Good, he said. Now, Miss Vale, describe your confraternity's structure. Who profits most if it collapses? She outlined the roster. 5 founding members, a few investors, multiple small cheesemakers united for branding strength. One name got Wolfe's attention. Emery Latimer, venture liaison, who'd once been a consultant for, no surprise, Millet Foods. When did Mr. Latimer join? Wolfe asked. 6 months ago. He manages contract negotiations and marketing outreach. Did he recommend Mr. Danner's photography for your events? Her eyes widened. Yes. How did you? Predictable, Wolfe said curtly. The man constructs his own sabotage pipeline. A consultant introduces an agent who contaminates product and reputation alike. A classical symmetry. The doorbell rang. Fritz's footsteps crossed the hall, then Saul entered, calm as an accountant bringing bad news. He handed me an envelope. Picked this up from Danner's wastebasket before he realized I was following him. I opened it. Inside were 4 glossy photographs. Close-ups of different cheese wheels, their rinds sliced with surgical precision, seepage glistening under camera light. But one photo wasn't cheese. It was the confraternity's Yonkers warehouse door, sprayed with a crude emblem, the same laurel-crowned wheel from our notes. Wolfe's nostrils flared. An artist of consistency, he murmured. Archie, have Saul describe the man with the briefcase. Saul did. Tall, silver at the temples, face like a tired accountant. But his suit was hand-stitched Italian, his watch cost more than my car, and his cufflinks were shaped like little wheat sheaves. Millet's symbol, I said. Wolfe closed his eyes. Indeed, they are wheat barons aspiring to dairy. A pity for them. The phone rang again. Fritz answered, then handed it to me. It was Stebbins, arriving out front with Kramer breathing down his neck. I let them in. Kramer stormed past like a thundercloud, his cigar smoking disapproval. All right, Wolfe, he barked. If this turns out to be another one of your culinary dramas, I'm billing you for my ulcers. Wolfe gestured to the photographs. Observe, Inspector. These images document deliberate adulteration of food products intended for commerce. The compound identified by Dr. Vollmer is sufficient to render goods unsellable, perhaps even cause mild illness. That is a felony. And, he pointed to the final photograph, the mark of a conspiracy. Kramer took one look and swore. You think this is corporate? I know it, Wolfe said. But the perpetrator now acts independently, seeking validation through me. The photograph of my house was a summons to play. I do not play. Kramer frowned. You've got proof? Not yet, but within 24 hours, I shall have the hand that held the solvent and the pen that signed the checks. That was Wolfe's version of a declaration of war. Kramer knew it too. He stubbed out his cigar and muttered something about paperwork. When he was gone, Wolfe looked at me. Archie, he said, inform Saul he will watch Mr. Latimer. Day and night, he will not approach. He will only observe. By tomorrow, we will invite our saboteur into this office, and we will let him think it was his idea. Serena Vale looked from Wolfe to me, startled. You mean here? Again? Madam, Wolfe said, leaning back with eyes half closed. There are 2 places in New York where the guilty should fear to tread. One is the district attorney's office. The other is my chair. And that was that. The cheese might still be sweating in the next room, but the real heat had just moved into ours. The next 24 hours didn't so much pass as crawl across the floor, dragging tension behind them. Wolfe spent the day in his office, the globe untouched, the orchids unvisited, and his temper on a short leash. I've seen him idle before, but never like this. Still as granite, thinking in layers I wouldn't climb with a ladder. Every hour or so, he'd summon me to report Saul's latest update on Latimer, and every time I came back with the same. The man was behaving like a citizen. Saul had tailed him from his apartment near Gramercy Park to Millet's corporate tower on 42nd, where he spent the day in meetings. Then to a mid-range restaurant for dinner. No shady rendezvous, no handoffs, no cloak and dagger. Just soup, steak, and solitude. Saul had the patience of a cat at a mouse hole, but even he was starting to think the mouse had gone on vacation. At 7 that evening, Wolfe finally stirred. He rang for Fritz, ordered roast chicken, and told me, "Call Miss Vale, tell her we dine at 8 and she will join us. She must learn composure before tomorrow." That line meant the trap was ready to be set. I called Serena. Her voice still carried a trace of nerves, but less than before. "Mr. Wolfe thinks I should practice composure," she said, attempting a smile through the receiver. "That's like asking a mouse to rehearse dinner with the cat." "Then come hungry," I said. "The cat's in an unusually philosophical mood." By 8, she arrived in a grey dress that was more armor than fashion. Fritz, who disapproves of fear in any form, welcomed her with wine and an assurance that all was well in the kitchen. Wolfe motioned her to the table and began to eat with his usual concentration, as if culinary perfection could coax truth from the air. When dessert arrived, mango mousse, light enough to impress even him, Wolfe dabbed his lips and said, "Miss Vale, you will remain calm tomorrow no matter what occurs. The guilty must feel safe before they expose themselves." Her fork paused mid-air. "You're certain they will?" "They must. Their method demands recognition." He turned to me. "Archie, the invitations." I pulled a stack of envelopes from my pocket. Each bore Wolfe's personal stationery, embossed in gold and carried identical wording. "You're invited to a private inquiry at the residence of Nero Wolfe concerning recent events affecting the confraternity of the Wheel. Your attendance is required. 11 a.m. sharp." Each was addressed to one of our key players, Emery Latimer, Clifford Danner, and 2 other confraternity members who'd had access to the tainted shipments. One more went to Kramer, though Wolfe added a note specifying attendance optional, silence mandatory. Serena read the list and looked puzzled. "You're inviting Danner here, and Latimer." "I am," Wolfe said. "A man who crafts contamination as art will not resist an audience. Mr. Latimer, if he is what I suspect, will attempt to direct the scene, and we shall let him until I close the curtain." That was his way of saying he planned to stage the finale in his office, as usual, with himself in the director's chair and the rest of us as unpaid cast. Later that night, after Miss Vale had gone home under Saul's watch, Wolfe and I settled in for the post-prandial briefing. The office smelled of cigars, old books, and anticipation. He sat there, eyes half closed, speaking slowly. "Archie, the pattern is now plain. The saboteur sought to humiliate the confraternity. Millet Foods provides motive and means, but too much distance. Latimer is the intermediary and Danner the artisan. Yet there remains one more hand, one who delights in spectacle, who sent the cheese to me. That hand must belong to Latimer. He would crave acknowledgement of his cleverness, and who better to admire him than me?" "You flatter him," I said. "I indict him," Wolfe corrected. "Vanity is his crime's signature." Around 10, the doorbell rang again. Fritz brought an envelope, hand-delivered, no signature. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper bearing our favorite emblem, the laurel-crowned wheel. Beneath it, in fine black ink, "Tomorrow, the wheel turns." Wolfe read it once, set it on his desk, and said, "He confirms his attendance." The next morning came clean and cold, the kind of weather that makes coffee taste like redemption. By 10:30, the office was ready. Wolfe sat behind his desk, immaculate in mustard-colored silk. Fritz had hidden the infamous cheese in the front room, though its ghost still haunted the air. I had arranged 5 chairs in a semicircle facing Wolfe's desk. The setup looked more courtroom than conference, which was precisely how he liked it. At 11 sharp, the guests arrived, almost theatrically punctual. Latimer came first, polite and unflappable in a pinstripe suit. Danner followed, sharp-eyed but pale. 2 confraternity members shuffled in next, looking like men who'd stumbled into a funeral rehearsal. Last came Kramer, pretending he was only there for the coffee. Once everyone was seated, Wolfe opened his eyes, calm as marble. "Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your punctuality. The purpose of this meeting is clarity. The confraternity of the Wheel has suffered deliberate injury. Its products were adulterated, its reputation attacked, and its future imperiled. The architect of these offenses is in this room." That line landed like a dropped weight. Danner flinched. One of the confraternity men swallowed audibly, and Latimer's expression didn't flicker an inch, which told me everything I needed to know. The calm ones always worry me most. Wolfe continued. "The evidence is straightforward. Mr. Danner, once discharged from Gastronome Weekly for falsifying food imagery, found employment through the recommendation of Mr. Latimer. Under his guidance, Danner photographed and subtly modified samples from multiple suppliers, introducing contamination to ensure their discredit. The compound identified by Dr. Vollmer was traced to a solvent used in photographic cleaning. Your solvent, Mr. Danner." Danner started to speak, but Wolfe's voice cut him off like a guillotine. "Spare me the denial. You were manipulated, not master. Mr. Latimer, will you continue your charade, or shall I read aloud the letter you sent to Millet Foods 2 months ago, offering to deliver the confraternity's market share within the quarter?" The room froze. Even Kramer's cigar paused halfway to his mouth. Latimer's lips parted, then closed. That letter was business negotiation, nothing criminal. "On the contrary," Wolfe said softly, "it was treachery disguised as commerce. You used Danner's desperation as your tool and Miss Vale's trust as your stage. You sent the corrupted Wheel to me not as threat, but as trophy. You wanted me to admire your cleverness." Latimer's face drained of color. "You can't prove." "Proof," Wolfe interrupted, "is a formality. The chemical traces, the correspondence retrieved by Mr. Panzer from your office waste, and your own vanity will suffice. Inspector Kramer?" Kramer stood, puffing hard. "You heard him, Latimer. Let's go." Latimer rose slowly, like a man aging 20 years in one breath. Danner slumped, defeated. The others looked stunned, relieved, and slightly nauseated. As the door closed behind Kramer and his prisoners, Wolfe leaned back, exhaling deeply. "Archie, open the window. I find the air improved already." I did, letting the cold rush in. Serena Vale stood silent, eyes shining, not with triumph, but something softer. "Mr. Wolfe," she said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you." "You needn't," he replied. "Merely resume your trade and resist all further consultants." When she left, Wolfe reached for the bell to summon Fritz. "Lunch," he said. "Something mild. The day reeks of ammonia." And just like that, the case of the cheese that smelled of murder was over, or as over as it ever gets in this house. Because when Wolfe declares justice served, he means it literally. You'd think that once Inspector Kramer marches out with 2 freshly unmasked villains, the brownstone would settle back into peace, the kind that smells of orchids and butter instead of crime. But that afternoon, the air refused to calm. Wolfe didn't rise from his chair. He didn't even touch the globe. He sat there as if the investigation hadn't ended at all, but had merely paused for intermission. I watched him long enough to realize he wasn't satisfied. There's a difference between Wolfe content and Wolfe finished. One involves beer, the other silence. Right now, we had neither. "What's missing?" I asked finally. He kept his eyes half closed. "Resolution," he murmured. "The pattern is incomplete. We've got Dana and Latimer in. Custody, the confraternity cleared, and Miss Vale back to counting cheese instead of conspiracies. What's not complete?" He opened his eyes then, dark and still. "The wheel turns, Archie. Do you recall the final message? That phrase was not Latimer's vocabulary. You think there's still another player?" "I think," he said slowly, "that Latimer believed himself the author of the scheme. But someone else, someone with wit enough to orchestrate the theater, manipulated him. The note after his arrest was delivered here at noon." He gestured toward the corner of his desk, where an envelope rested like a bad omen. I hadn't even seen Fritz bring it in. The same thick paper, the same embossed wheel. Inside, a single sentence. The cheese was never the crime, only the rehearsal. That did it. "So, we just arrested the opening act." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Our correspondent continues the performance. He requires attention, and he will earn it. Archie, call Kramer. Ask what Mr. Latimer confessed." Kramer wasn't thrilled to hear from me again. "He's singing," he said. "Says he got his orders by letter, anonymous. Claims he thought he was helping a marketing stunt. Figures Dana would do the dirty work, and the result would scare the small producers into selling to Millet. Then, this is the funny part, he says the letters stopped coming right after that wheel hit your doorstep. Any idea who sent them? No names, just that same stupid seal, the laurel wheel." "Thanks, Inspector," I said. "You've made my day grim." When I relayed it to Wolfe, he nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "A puppeteer, not content to watch his strings cut? Very well. He seeks dialogue. We shall oblige him. How? By bait. We shall return the cheese." It took me a second. "You're sending that cursed thing back out into the world?" "Only its image. The specimen itself remains our guest, but you will inform the press that Nero Wolfe, having solved the sabotage, will be displaying the wheel publicly this evening for inspection by Miss Vale and her board. You will make it appear as though it is to be returned to its rightful owner." "That'll draw flies," I said, "including the kind that sting." "That," he said, "is the purpose." By 6, the story had traveled faster than Fritz's soufflé deflatus. A few reporters had called, and one even asked if Wolfe planned to serve samples. I told him to bring his own insurance. The confraternity members arrived at 8, cautious but curious. Serena came last, her expression lighter than yesterday, though she still looked around the office like a person expecting ghosts. Wolfe had the wheel back on the table, sealed, photographed, and sitting on a linen cloth like an artifact from a lost civilization. He'd arranged it for drama, of course. Fritz hovered in the doorway, frowning at the idea of so much aroma near the dining schedule. The doorbell rang again. I opened it, expecting another late reporter. Instead, a man stood there I didn't recognize. Slender, trim beard, impeccable coat, and eyes that glimmered with private amusement. He held an envelope in one gloved hand. "For Mr. Wolfe," he said, and stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Wolfe looked up, faintly irritated. "You have an introduction." The man smiled. "Only this." He handed over the envelope. Wolfe opened it, and inside was a check, made out to him, signed in a bold, artistic hand, P. Marquette. Wolfe's eyebrows went up half a fraction. "Ah," he said softly. "The impresario himself." Serena stiffened. "Pierre Marquette, the critic." "Indeed," Wolfe said, "the self-appointed oracle of gastronomy. I wondered when you would appear, sir." Marquette inclined his head slightly. "You've spoiled my ending, Mr. Wolfe, but I suppose that's your métier. The confraternity's hubris required correction. I provided it." "You poisoned your reputation for sport," Wolfe said coldly, "and others' livelihoods besides." "Correction," Marquette replied. "I refined them. I exposed their dependence on mediocrity. a spoiled wheel, a ruined tasting. It reveals who can survive scandal and who cannot. You, Mr. Wolfe, should appreciate the art of controlled decay. I'd met arrogant men before, but this one made them look bashful. Wolfe, though, didn't rise to it. He merely folded his hands. "Your mistake," he said, "was assuming control. You presumed to orchestrate the finale. Yet you overlooked one fact. Vanity, like cheese, matures poorly in heat." Marquette's smile flickered. "You have no proof." Wolfe motioned to me. I picked up a second folder from his desk and opened it. Inside were copies of telegrams sent from Marquette's office. Orders to a chemical supplier for the very solvent Vollmer had identified, billed under a false corporate name. Saul had traced it that afternoon. Marquette's confidence curdled fast. "You had no warrant." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "I had curiosity, Mr. Goodwin's curiosity, to be precise. It suffices." Kramer, who had been lurking in the hall waiting for his cue, stepped in then, cigar blazing like Judgment Day. "It'll suffice for me, too. All right, Marquette, you can explain your philosophy downtown." The critic's composure cracked completely. "You idiots don't understand. It wasn't crime. It was commentary." "Tell it to the grand jury," Kramer said, and shoved him gently toward the door. When the commotion ended, the brownstone felt normal again, if you can call it normal when Fritz is disinfecting air molecules. Serena Vale stood quietly, watching Wolfe. "You didn't just solve it," she said. "You staged it." Wolfe inclined his head. "Occasionally, Miss Vale, the only way to expose artifice is to outdo it." She smiled faintly. "Then, allow me to say, you outdid it beautifully." After she left, Wolfe sighed, long and deep. "Archie, open the beer. 1 glass, large." As I poured, he added, "And tell Fritz to remove that wheel. The case has exhausted its aroma and my patience." I brought him the beer. He lifted it, tasted, and finally relaxed. "There is a moral," he said. "Let me guess," I said. "Never accept cheese by mail." He gave me the look that says I've fallen short of enlightenment. "No. That vanity, when cultivated too long, produces not brilliance, but rot." He drank again, eyes closing in satisfaction. Outside, the city hummed like nothing had happened. Inside, the brownstone breathed easy for the first time in days, and as for me, I filed the case under finished, though the smell might take longer to forget. When Kramer and Marquette were gone, the brownstone exhaled like a beast after a hunt. You could feel it in the silence, the kind that isn't peace yet, but the moment after the orchestra stops playing and everyone wonders if the last note really was the end. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, the beer glass untouched on his desk. Fritz moved soundlessly in the hall, disinfecting the crime's aroma out of the air. I stayed put because there was something in Wolfe's posture that said we weren't entirely through. He spoke without opening his eyes. "Archie, did you observe his hands?" "Marquette's?" "Yes." I was too busy making sure Kramer didn't mistake me for a witness to arrest. "His hands," Wolfe said again, "were too steady." That wasn't a surprise. Wolfe notices more about people's hands than a piano teacher does. But it still puzzled me. "So he's not nervous. He's a sociopath. Congratulations. That's not news." "Not steady in that sense," Wolfe said. "Steady as in practiced. The hand of a man who writes daily with a pen." He opened his eyes now, and they had that alert gleam that meant his brain was chewing on something more nourishing than dessert. "You recall the handwriting on the first note that accompanied the cheese?" "Yeah. Small, neat, sharp letters. Like a lawyer trying to prove he passed Latin." "Not Marquette's," Wolfe said. "I compared the script on his check to the original note. Distinctly different hand." That pulled the rug from under the room. "Then Marquette wasn't the one sending you the riddles?" Precisely. He authored the scheme, but not the correspondence. There was collaboration. He may have believed himself the conductor, yet someone else composed the score. I stared at him. So after all that, Danner, Latimer, Marquette, there's still a ghost in the orchestra pit. He didn't answer. Instead, he rang for Fritz, requested another beer, and told me to fetch the first note from the evidence file. I did. He spread both documents side by side. The cheese note and Marquette's check, his eyes moved between them, slow as clock hands. The formation of the S, he murmured. Distinct curvature. Feminine, confident, but untrained in formal calligraphy. A woman's hand. Serena Vale, I said before I could stop myself. Wolfe didn't look up. An unworthy conjecture, but not impossible. Yet I do not leap to insult a client without necessity. Bring the second note, the one declaring the wheel's rehearsal. I fetched it. Wolfe compared that too, then nodded once as though confirming a suspicion that had been chewing at him all day. All three are in different hands, he said. One, the initial, careful, deliberate. The second, more theatrical, intended to unsettle. The third, written in haste. Someone is editing the script as we acted. That was when the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared again, looking mildly alarmed. A messenger, sir. No name given. Wolfe's head tilted slightly. At this hour. I took it. Another envelope. Same embossed seal. The laurel wheel. Inside, a single sheet. You may have caught the actors, Mr. Wolfe, but the play is not over until the curtain burns. I passed it to him. He read it twice, placed it on the desk, and said in a voice so calm it made my spine colder than the note did. Lock the doors. I obeyed. You think someone's coming? Someone already has, he said. Look at the paper. The paper was damp. Just a little, like it had been handled with sweaty fingers or pulled from fog. But there was a faint scent clinging to it. Not ink, not perfume. Something earthy, herbal. Marjoram, Wolfe said. Fritz uses it in the kitchen. No other source nearby. The messenger came from within a block. That narrows it to about 3 million suspects, I said. He ignored that. Phone Saul. Tell him to return to Miss Vale's residence. If she is not there, he will call immediately. I did as told. Saul answered on the second ring. She's not home, he said before I could even ask. Her doorman says she left an hour ago. Said she was going to see Wolfe. I looked at the note again. The play is not over until the curtain burns. My mouth went dry. Saul, get here, now. Wolfe didn't move. He just said, Archie, the front room. I knew what he meant. The cheese. The wheel was still there, sealed, waiting like an unexploded bomb. I opened the door to the front room. The towel Fritz had wedged under the door was half pushed inward, as though someone had moved it. And the smell, stronger than ever. Not just cheese now, something acrid, chemical. Wolfe, I called, backing up. It's leaking something. He was beside me in seconds, faster than a man his size had any right to move. Do not touch it, he said. Fritz, windows. Fritz opened both, coughing as the stench rolled out. Wolfe bent slightly, studying the floor. A thin trickle of milky liquid had seeped from under the cloth. He dipped the edge of a spoon into it, held it to the light, then frowned. Acid, he said. Not corrosive enough to destroy the rind entirely, but enough to generate heat when reacting with organic fat. Someone meant it to ignite. You mean explode? He nodded once. A crude thermochemical reaction. If the container was sealed completely, the gas buildup could have caused fire. The implication landed between us like a punch. Whoever had delivered the final note had intended to turn Wolfe's office into the closing act. Literally in flames. Fritz, pale but steady, fetched a metal tray. Wolfe, with surprising care, lifted the wheel using 2 folded dishcloths and placed it outside on the stone steps under the night air. The odor drifted after it like guilt. When we came back in, Wolfe sank into his chair, breathing heavily but calm. "Archie," he said, "we must prepare for the final visitor. Our adversary will come to see if the curtain burned." Saul arrived 15 minutes later, face tight. No sign of Miss Vale, but her car's parked 2 streets away. Engine cold? Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "She is near, then. Wait in the hallway. If anyone approaches, do not interfere until I signal." He sat back, folded his hands, and closed his eyes as if preparing for a guest at midnight. And right on cue, the bell rang again. One long, confident press. I opened the door. Serena Vale stood there, hair disheveled, eyes bright, not frightened, but electric with something close to triumph. "I had to see you," she said breathlessly. "It's over. I found another note in my office, addressed to me, not you." Wolfe's voice, deep and cold, filled the space. "Indeed, Miss Vale, you may hand it to me, very carefully." She hesitated, then stepped inside, pulling a folded page from her coat pocket. But as she did, Wolfe's gaze froze. Not on the paper, but on her gloves. They were singed, tiny blackened marks along the fingertips. He didn't need to say it, but he did anyway. "Archie, take the note, with tongs." The truth had arrived, and it smelled worse than cheese. I took the note from Serena Vale with the kind of care usually reserved for nitroglycerin and egos. The gloves were the giveaway. Thin leather, singed at the fingertips, the faint brown curls of heat marks where flame had tried to get a word in. Saul, standing by the door, caught the detail too. His hand moved instinctively toward his pocket, where he kept the sort of hardware Wolfe disapproved of but never actually forbade. Wolfe's voice came low and even, the sound of a net being cast. "Miss Vale," he said, "you have had a difficult evening. Sit, if you please." She hesitated, her eyes darting from me to the smoldering patience in Wolfe's gaze. There wasn't time. I came as soon as I realized." "Sit," he repeated, and she did, her body obeying before her conscience could decide whether it wanted to. The note lay on Wolfe's desk, still unopened. He regarded it as if it were an exotic insect pinned under glass. "Archie, describe the gloves." "Soft leather, brown, scorched at the tips," I said. "Heat exposure, close contact, maybe something chemical." He nodded once. "Precisely. Miss Vale, when did you last touch the wheel?" Her head snapped up. "Never. You told me not to go near it." "I did. Yet the gloves contradict you." She blinked, then looked down at them as if the burns had just appeared. "These? There was smoke in my office. I was handling a candle." "Don't," Wolfe said gently. "You are too intelligent to offer such nonsense. The composition of that wheel was tampered with to ignite under controlled pressure. Someone attempted that experiment earlier, perhaps in a smaller sample, to test the reaction. Those gloves carry the residue of the test." I'd seen Wolfe interrogate a lot of suspects, but rarely with this quiet precision, the kind that cuts deeper because it doesn't try. Serena sat frozen, her mouth opened, then closed. "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," she said finally. "It wasn't supposed to—" "Explode?" Wolfe asked. She swallowed hard. "No, it was supposed to frighten him. Marquette. He ruined everything we built, stole our reputation, sold us out, humiliated me. I wanted him to feel what it was like to lose control." "That's a popular motive," I said. "But you picked an odd messenger." Her eyes flashed at me. "You think I wanted this circus? He sent that first wheel to you, not me. He wanted attention. He wanted drama. I just played his game back." "You corresponded with him," Wolfe said. It wasn't a question. She nodded faintly. "After the first scandal, He wrote to me, letters at first, then calls. He said we could rebuild together, that he'd expose Latimer and Danner if I cooperated. He sent me drafts of the articles he'd write, scathing ones that would destroy Millet's influence. I believed him until I realized he was setting me up too. By then, I was in too deep. Her voice cracked on the last words. Fritz, hovering near the door, looked ready to fetch brandy, but Wolfe raised a hand. Continue. When I learned he'd been arrested, I panicked. There were chemicals in the sample room, a set we used to clean molds and rinds. I tried to replicate what he described in his notes just to see. I thought it was harmless. Then the fumes caught fire. I burned my gloves putting it out. And then, Wolfe said softly, you brought me the evidence. Not to confess, but to complete his design. You delivered the final act of his play. Her chin trembled. No, I came to stop it. He didn't raise his voice, but the air seemed to tighten anyway. Miss Vale, you cannot stop what you have already set in motion. You corresponded with a man whose currency was humiliation. You adopted his language, his theatrics. And when he fell, you assumed his role. She buried her face in her hands. I never wanted this. I just wanted my work back. Understandable, Wolfe said, but ill-executed. You sought vindication through deceit, and nearly achieved destruction instead. I caught Saul's glance. He was reading the same thing I was. This wasn't a confession we could dress up for the police. It was a tangle of guilt, pride, and desperation, the sort of cocktail that makes juries sigh and columnists drool. Wolfe, meanwhile, unfolded the note she had brought. It bore only 2 words, written in the same sharp, confident hand as the first letter that came with the cheese. Forgive me. He placed it on the desk and regarded her in silence. The clock ticked, loud and slow. Finally, he said, You were his mirror. He wrote those words not to the world, but to you, and you, in your need for meaning, delivered them here. Symbolically apt, but futile. She looked up at him, tears balanced precariously. What happens now? You will give a full account to Inspector Kramer, he said. The evidence of your letters, the chemicals, the burned gloves. You will tell him everything precisely as it occurred. If he possesses wit, he will recognize mitigating intent. If not, the district attorney will. Saul spoke up for the first time. Want me to escort her? Yes, Wolfe said, and afterward you will see that the remaining correspondence between her and Marquette is turned over to the authorities. Then inform Mr. Kramer that the case is concluded. For real this time. When they left, the door closed with a finality that felt earned. I lingered, waiting for the explosion that usually follows when Wolfe has to clean up after human folly. But none came. He just stared at the empty chair where Serena had been sitting. You're quiet, I said. Reflection, he murmured. Miss Vale's error was not malice, but mimicry. She mistook performance for power. So did Marquette. So do most. I lit a cigarette and leaned against the desk. So, morale of the story. Don't try to upstage a critic. He gave a small grunt. Don't attempt art in the medium of deceit. It spoils too quickly. That was his verdict, and it carried more weight than a judge's gavel. Fritz reappeared then, cautious, like a man checking if civilization had resumed. Dinner, sir. Wolfe nodded. Yes, something restorative. No cheese. I couldn't argue. The brownstone finally felt breathable again, even if the faint ghost of that wheel still haunted the corners. As I shut the office lights later that night, I caught myself thinking that Wolfe's world, for all its order, never really stays undisturbed for long. And somewhere between the sound of rain on the windows and the faint scent of marjoram still lingering in the air, I realized the truth of it. Some cases end not with triumph, but with the quiet, complicated mercy of understanding. Morning slid into the brownstone like it had been asked to behave. The rain had cleared, the orchids glistened behind their glass wall, and Fritz had reclaimed the kitchen as if exorcising bad spirits with the smell of coffee and butter. It should have been peaceful, but I've learned that after a case like that, Wolfe never returns to normal right away. The mind that had chewed through deceit all night doesn't stop just because the clock insists it's breakfast. I was at my desk when Wolfe came down from the plant rooms, slower than usual, wrapped in the kind of silence that's louder than speech. He nodded at Fritz's greeting, sat heavily, and said nothing until the first cup of beer was poured. "Saul called," I said finally. Kramer took Miss Vale's statement. She's not facing murder, but she's looking at a long talk with the DA. They're leaning toward negligence and tampering, not intent to kill. "Just," Wolfe murmured, but uncomfortably merciful. Kramer detests pity in any form. "Maybe he's learning," I said. He gave me one of those glances that can sandpaper sarcasm off a man's tongue. Kramer's education is perpetual and involuntary. So is ours. "Tell me, did she sign the confession willingly?" "According to Saul, yes. No fireworks. She even asked if she could send you a note of apology." He winced slightly. "If she insists, I prefer a basket of fruit. No cheese." That got a small laugh out of me, and maybe even out of him, though with Wolfe you can never tell whether the sound is humor or a sneeze disguised as dignity. He sipped, then said, "You are curious, Archie. Ask what you wish to know." I leaned back. "All right. You knew before she walked in last night, didn't you? About the gloves, the letters, the whole finale." "I suspected," he said. Certainty came only when she entered without fear. A woman who has fled danger trembles at the door. A woman who has completed her purpose walks in calm. So the whole performance last night, the stage display, the bait about the wheel, was for her. For her, he agreed, and for me. One must confirm theory by observation. The play required its final actor. He took another sip of beer and shut his eyes. Marquette sought art in cruelty. Miss Vale sought meaning in imitation. The others sought profit. Each perverted the nature of creation for gain or pride. That was the true contamination, not the cheese. I let him have his philosophy. It fit the mood. The office smelled faintly of soap and smoke, but beneath that, something still lingered. Not guilt exactly, more like the aftertaste of deceit. You can scrub a floor, but not conscience. At noon, Saul dropped by. He'd shaved, eaten, and looked like a man who had spent a long night watching someone else's conscience unravel. "Kramer says the lab confirmed Wolfe's call," he reported. "The stuff on the wheel was a mix of ammonium salts and a volatile compound. From the same batch found in Miss Vale's storeroom, her fingerprints were on every container. They're not charging her yet, but she's not walking free either." Wolfe nodded without surprise. "And Marquette?" "Indicted. He'll talk. He already hinted there's a letter trail showing he used Vale's company to funnel his experiments." "That," Wolfe said, "will ensure her ruin regardless of the court's mercy. Reputation dies swifter than flesh." Saul studied him. "You almost sound sorry for her." "I'm not," Wolfe said sharply, though his tone softened after. "But pity, Mr. Panzer, is not endorsement. She was a capable woman undone by vanity. It is a recurring tragedy of civilization." Saul gave a short nod, pocketed his notebook, and left. When the door closed, Wolfe sat for a moment in silence, staring at the now empty spot where the cheese once sat. "You know," I said, "for a man who hates disturbances, you attract them like a magnet in a junkyard." He opened one eye. "You overstate. The world insists on intrusion. I merely resist. Call it what you like, but you can't say you don't enjoy the chase once it's underway." He made a low sound in his throat. Not quite agreement, not quite denial. Enjoyment is an imprecise term. Satisfaction, perhaps. Not of pursuit, but of resolution. I nodded. "Well, you got your resolution. No one died, no one escaped, and you even got your moral. You should be pleased. I'm not displeased, he said, but I remain unsatisfied. I should have known better than to ask why, but habit's hard to break. What's left? He folded his hands. The final letter. The one that said, "Forgive me." You recall the ink? Dark brown, maybe fading. Why? It was written with the same ink used for the original note, the one that came with the wheel, but it was not penned by the same hand. That stopped me. Then she didn't write it? No, he said quietly. Nor did Marquette. Someone else sent it after both were already ensnared. I blinked. You mean there's still another? He cut me off with a gesture. No, there is no another. There is only the world, always ready to imitate, to borrow villainy and rename it art. Someone may have sent that note to amuse themselves or to test me. It is irrelevant. The curtain has fallen. We will not perform encores. That was Wolfe's way of saying the case was closed, whether truth agreed or not. And maybe he was right. After all, some mysteries don't end. They just run out of audience. The afternoon stretched lazy and quiet. Fritz served lunch, veal with capers, thin noodles, and not a crumb of cheese in sight. Wolfe ate methodically, as if feeding reason rather than appetite. When he finished, he leaned back and sighed. Archie, he said, you will send a note to the confraternity informing them that my services are concluded. No further consultation will be offered. Sure, I said. And what if they send you a thank-you gift basket? He scowled. Then you will intercept it. Understood. I'll eat the evidence. That got him to open one eye again. You are irreverent. Occupational hazard. As the day dimmed, the brownstone finally slipped into its old rhythm, the faint clink of Fritz's kitchen, the ticking of the clock, the rustle of a page turning. Outside, the city carried on, none the wiser that a critic's vanity, a woman's pride, and a detective's intellect had danced around a wheel of cheese that nearly burned them all. I was writing up my notes when Wolfe spoke again, low and almost to himself. Archie, there is a peculiar kinship between art and crime. Both seek perfection, and both are ruined by excess. I looked up. And where does justice fit in? He smiled faintly. Justice, my friend, is merely taste exercised by the mind instead of the palate. That was Wolfe, ending not with triumph, but with philosophy. I closed my notebook, turned off the light, and let the office go dark. The smell of marjoram had finally faded, but the lesson hung in the air, quiet, sharp, and enduring. And somewhere between the silence and the faint creak of his chair, I realized that the case had ended exactly as it should, with Nero Wolfe content and the world, for once, properly disturbed. It was the morning after the storm, the kind of morning New York gives you as an apology. Clear, sharp light spilled through the office windows, glancing off Wolfe's desk and catching the brass handles on the filing cabinet like the last remnants of a crime that had surrendered overnight. I was sorting the last of the case papers. Miss Vale's statement, Marquette's confession, the chemical reports from Volmer, when Wolfe gave the small grunt that meant his thoughts were coming to a boil. Archie, he said, without looking up from his chair, I will never again tolerate dairy in this house that was not vetted by Fritz or by God himself. I'll alert the milk board, I said. He ignored that, naturally. Has Inspector Kramer concluded his self-congratulation? He sent his regards, I told him. Said your theories saved him a month of legwork and a lifetime of ulcers. Then he added that next time you could keep your cheese to yourself. Phooey, Wolfe muttered. If his digestion was sound, his mind might follow. The morning papers were spread open before him. The headlines were predictable. Critics' plot exposed, sabotage in the dairy trade, confraternity vindicated. Every journalist with a vocabulary longer than his temper had taken a turn, squeezing meaning out of the mess. None of them, I noticed, had come close to Wolfe's version of truth. Fritz appeared to announce that Miss Vale had sent a parcel. Fruit, not cheese. Wolfe accepted this without comment. The faintest twitch of approval crossed his face, which in his language is a standing ovation. "Have you written to her?" he asked. "Typed it this morning," I said. A nice neutral letter. Gratitude for cooperation, confidence in the restoration of her reputation, no promises about the DA or divine forgiveness. He nodded once. "Good. We deal in facts, not absolution." That line hung there a moment. It summed up everything about Nero Wolfe, and maybe everything about the case too. Nobody in this one had been innocent. Not Dana, not Latimer, not Marquette, and not even Serena Vale. Each of them had stirred the pot for vanity, ambition, or revenge, and each had found out the hard way that corruption has a smell you can't wash off. I sat back, lighting a cigarette. "You know, it's funny. All that work, all those clues, and it wasn't murder that started this. It was ego." "Most crimes are," Wolfe said. "Murder is merely ego's impatient form." This was the same disease in subtle address, people hungry to matter, to be admired, to leave their mark. When vanity meets opportunity, the result is always rot. "Nice philosophy," I said. "You should print it on business cards." He gave me the narrow-eyed look that means I've outstayed my wit. "Archie, do be still." Outside, a delivery truck rattled past. The orchids behind the glass swayed gently as air shifted through the room. For a long time, Wolfe said nothing more. Then he sighed, deep, slow, final. "Archie," he said, "summarize." That was ritual. It meant he wanted the story laid out, beginning to end, to hear the architecture of his own triumph in someone else's voice. I obliged. "You saw the wheel as message, not merchandise," I began. "You realized the odor wasn't natural, it was performance. From there, Latimer's fingerprints on the confraternity, Dana's photographic sabotage, Marquette's philosophical madness, and finally Miss Vale's imitation of his lunacy. You drew the line through all of them, and every knot came loose." He closed his eyes, listening like a man to his favorite piece of music. "Exactly so. Each mind, revealing itself by its smallest gesture. The handwriting, the smell, the sequence. It was never the cheese, Archie. It was always the people. Cheese only ripens. Man festers." He took a final drink of beer, set down the glass with the grace of a verdict delivered, and leaned back. "The case is finished." "Officially?" I asked. "Eternally." That was my cue. I cleared the desk, stacked the last folder, and opened the window a crack. The city's air slipped in, brisk, faintly scented with exhaust and bakery, just the way I like it. Wolfe grumbled but didn't protest. He had his closure, his philosophy, and his beer. The universe was momentarily in balance. When I switched off the desk lamp, the room fell into a kind of peace that only comes after truth has been wrung out of deception. Fritz's footsteps echoed softly down the hall, promising lunch. As I turned to go, Wolfe spoke again, low and reflective. "Archie, one lesson is constant. Corruption seeks beauty because it envies it. When you next find yourself drawn by a fine aroma, ask whether it conceals decay." "Wise words," I said. "I'll keep them in mind the next time someone sends us a wheel of temptation." He gave a faint, sardonic hum. "Temptation," he said, "is merely hunger misdirected." That was as close to a sermon as Nero Wolfe ever got. I left him to his orchids and his philosophy, both thriving under the same conditions: warm light, good food, and absolute solitude. Downstairs, I caught a glimpse of the front steps through the glass. The morning sun was hitting the metal tray where the infamous wheel had sat, gleaming like nothing bad had ever happened there. Maybe that's the trick of the brownstone. Trouble comes, trouble goes, and Wolfe remains, immovable as ever. His mind cleans the world the way Fritz cleans his kitchen, ruthlessly, without sentiment, until all that's left is order. I locked the door, flicked the Do Not Disturb sign into place, and headed out into the street. Another day, another client, another human folly waiting to ferment. Behind me, in the sanctity of the brownstone, Nero Wolfe sat in perfect stillness, the last trace of satisfaction crossing his face as Fritz entered with lunch. Order restored, appetite intact, and the smell, finally, gone. 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 Gone.